A very good morning and many thanks for joining us on another edition of Political Spectrum. We're coming to you live on Spectrum Television. Hello from me, I am Raymond Ita. Nigerians woke up this morning to a stunning announcement from President Muhammadu Buhari addressing the impasse occasioned in the last few days and the confusion surrounding the validity of the old 200, 500 and 1,000 naira notes that ceased to be legal tenders courtesy of the CBN's directive as of February 10, 2023. Well, yesterday's ruling by the Supreme Court adjourned till February 22nd for a further hearing of the suit filed by some state governors challenging the CBN's naira redesign policy. Had occasioned some level of confusion amongst Nigerians as to whether or not to comply with the Supreme Court ruling or heed to the CBN and the federal government's directives that the old notes had long ceased to be legal tenders. Well, it degenerated to a level of protest and chaos in some parts of the country, with Delta and Edo states reporting skirmishes that eventually resulted in the deaths of 4 persons. Well, earlier this morning, President Buhari, in a nationwide broadcast, ordered that the old 500 and 1,000 naira banknotes are no longer legal tenders in Nigeria. He, however, directed the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, to release the old 200 naira notes into circulation as a legal tender for the next 60 days. But the president, who made this known earlier this morning, equally directed the CBN to allow the new notes to be available to the citizens. Now, he further apologized to Nigerians over the difficulty experienced in the implementation of the naira redesign policy. Well, later on in the program, we'll be getting reports from some parts of the country as to how the brunt of this policy has been felt by Nigerians owing to the scarcity of these notes. But first off, let's get to hear from President Muhammadu Buhari in the nationwide address he delivered to Nigerians earlier this morning on the state of the nation as regards the further circulation of the old 200 naira note, which he has said remains legal tenders and can run concurrently with the new ones for the next 60 days. Let's take a listen.
Tightening my dear compatriots, I have found it necessary to address you today on the state of the nation and to render account on the efforts of our administration to sustain and strengthen our economy, enhance the fight against corruption, and sustain our gains in the fight against terrorism and insecurity, which has undoubtedly been impacted by several internal and external factors. Particularly, I'm addressing you as your democratically elected president to identify with you and express my sympathy over the difficulties being experienced as we continue the implementation of new monetary policies aimed at boosting our economy and tightening of the loopholes associated with money laundering. Let me reassure Nigerians that strengthening our economy, enhancing security, and blockage of leakages associated with illicit financial flows remain top priority of our administration. And I shall remain committed to my oath of protecting and advancing the interests of Nigerians and the nation at all times. In the last quarter of 2022, I authorized the Central Bank of Nigeria to redesign the 200 naira, 500 naira, and 1,000 naira Nigerian banknotes. For a smooth transition, I similarly approved that the redesigned banknotes should circulate concurrently with the old banknotes till 31st January 2023, before the old notes. In line with Section 20, subsection 3 of the CBN Act 2007, all existing old 1,000 naira and 500 naira notes remain redeemable at CBN and designated points. Considering the health of our economy and the legacy we must bequeath to the next administration and future generations of Nigerians, I admonish every citizen to strive harder to make their deposits by taking advantage of the platforms and windows being provided by the CBN. Let me assure Nigerians that our administration will continue to assess the implementation with a view to ensuring that Nigerians are not unnecessarily burdened. In this regard, the CBN shall ensure that new notes become more available and accessible to our citizens through the banks. I wish to once more appeal for your understanding till we overcome this difficult transient phase within the shortest possible time. Fellow citizens, on the 25th of February 2023, the nation will be electing a new president and National Assembly members. I am aware that these new members monetary policy has also contributed immensely to the minimization of the influence of money in politics. This is a positive departure from the past and represents a bold legacy step by this administration towards laying a strong foundation for free and fair elections. I urge every citizen, therefore, to go out to vote for their candidates of choice without fear, because security shall be provided and your vote shall count. I, however, admonish you to eschew violence and avoid actions capable of disrupting the electoral processes. I wish us all a successful general elections. Thank you for listening. God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
That was President Muhammadu Buhari delivering a nationwide broadcast early this morning, inundating Nigerians about clarity surrounding the CBN's policy on the Naira redesign policy, as well as the validity of the old 200 Naira note, which he has instructed should be put back into circulation by the Central Bank of Nigeria for the next 60 days, starting from February 10th, which was a few days ago, and would elapse, of course, on the 10th of April later this year. So that's the information made available to Nigerians, and a window has equally been open for people to continue returning the old 500 and 1,000 Naira note back to the CBN and the designated centers that they have actually issued. Do not forget, the CBN issued a circular just 2 days ago where they said there were procedures that they needed to follow if they have to return the old notes, but some have complained that these measures and procedures are quite stringent and tedious for most Nigerians to comply with. And perhaps this necessitated the developments we saw across the country yesterday, especially in Delta and Edo states, where we told skirmishes resulted in the burning down of some banks. In Delta State, a report of 2 banks being attacked and set ablaze, while in Edo State, fighting around the premises of the Central Bank of Nigeria's office resulted in the death of 4 persons. The identity of the slain fellows is yet to be confirmed. We leave that pending investigations by the Nigerian police in Edo State. And by the way, Governor Godwin Obaseki has ordered for the arrest of the former governor Adams Oshemele, whom he accused of instigating the protest yesterday that degenerated to the state of violence. And most Nigerians have said, where do we head from here? With the Supreme Court ruling yesterday that its initial judgment of February 8th still stands. So, in the eyes of the Supreme Court, the old 200, 500 and 1,000 naira notes are still valid. However, Mr. President's address this morning is on the contrary. Only the 200 naira notes can run concurrently, side by side with the new ones and the newly designed 500 and 1,000 naira notes. So, what do these decisions mean and the implications going forward, especially with the elections 9 days away from today? When we come back from this break, we'll be talking to our guest to give us feelers on the development occasioned by the Naira redesign policy in different parts of the country. We go to Benue State first, where Governor Dobut is on standby, and later on, the legal perspective of this decision. Barrister Akai will join us as well to bear his thoughts. We'll be right back after this break. Please stay with us.
As Nigeria prepares for the general elections holding from 25th February 2023, broadcasters are enjoined to make ethical reportage their watchword. All political programs shall observe the provisions of the Nigeria Broadcasting Code and other extant laws relating to broadcasting. All broadcasting stations must adhere to the principles of pluralism and ensure equitable airtime to all political parties or views. All political programs shall adhere to the general principles of legality, decency, and truthfulness. For the avoidance of doubt, the broadcast of a political campaign, jingle, announcement, or any other form of partisan party identification or symbol ends not later than 24 hours before polling day. Hate speech is prohibited. Be professional. NBC, your right to quality broadcasting. Announcer, management.
Nigerian police, which is the only one allowed by grossly abused. Our governors have to share police power with the president as stipulated by the constitution. We do not have a federal government police force. We have the Nigerian police force, which shall be administered, organized, and supervised by the Nigerian police force.
No, my lord, I want to say something. I want to say something here. Perhaps it might also enlarge the scope of people who should be invited here for examination. My lord, if we cannot find those who literally murdered Abiola, who are those people who could be said to be the beneficiaries of the death of Abiola?
Rogers has linked you with some of the killings he did.
He never did.
He linked you with the attempted murder of Hebrew.
He did not.
My lord, the Matters Council is leading the evidence in our matters.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my lord, but we can't be talking about cases which are in court, my lord.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my lord. These cases are in court, my lord. I'm just reminding your lordship.
My lord, sorry, my lord, I think I'll be in cross-examination.
Legally Speaking, a program that deals with legal issues and questions we face as citizens of this amazing country, Nigeria. Legally Speaking. Join us every Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. for Legally Speaking.
Every day, we bring you up-to-date information on topical issues affecting the common Nigerian.
From issues on politics,
Hello, Nigerians. I remain committed.
Security.
Education, health,
Lifestyle, and so much more. Join Janice Kobum and Uyai Anyeken
every weekday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Rise and Shine Daily, exclusive on Spectrum Television.
One truth not often told is about the transformation that Africa has undergone in recent decades. Africa is shaping its own destiny and should be referred to as the African opportunity. On Spotlight Africa, we paint the African picture the African way, laced with truth, detail, and the color of the African continent. Join Uyai Anyekan every Tuesday and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Spotlight Africa, telling the African story.
Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Political Spectrum, and we're live on Spectrum Television. Don't forget, you can always connect with us on StarTime's DTH Channel 421. And of course, you can follow us for more live feeds by simply heading to all of our social media platforms, and do also subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on our website. Just search spectrumtv.ng. The day's biggest story, of course, arguably has to be Mr. President's address to the nation early this morning to address the confusion and the impasse that was occasioned by the Naira redesign policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Well, a brief overview of the drama that has ensued since October last year, when the CBN first announced that Mr. President would give an approval to the new currency redesign on December 15th, opening a window between October last year and January 31st this year for Nigerians to return their old notes in exchange, of course, for the new ones. It's a policy that's been largely flawed by the implementation pattern adopted by the Central Bank of Nigeria, which many have said is largely responsible for the hardship occasioned on Nigerians in terms of keeping to the directives and ensuring that they have equal access to cash. Because while there's been speculations that politicians and the political elite have actually stashed away this money, perhaps it's given reasons or informed Mr. President's decision to allow only the old 200 Naira notes to remain in circulation, while the 500 Naira and of course the 1000 Naira notes are being set to be ceased to become legal tenders as of the 10th of February. So why did we have this impasse, and what led to the state of confusion that we're having at the moment? So back to the summary and the lead up to the states that we are at this moment. Mr. President eventually gave the approval for the Naira redesign on the 15th of December, while Nigerians had until the 31st of January to ensure they had returned all of their old notes. But there was an extension by a further 10 days by Mr. President up until February 10th to allow Nigerians to continue returning the old notes. But most of the confusion that most Nigerians have had to face and the hardships that has been occasioned by this policy is the lack of the new notes at the banks or via the super agents or the POS operators as we know them, or withdrawing cash via the ATMs, leading to long queues across the country, across commercial banks as well. And of course, the ugly things that we saw yesterday and the day before around some banking premises, where mild protests eventually degenerated to a state of chaos, leading to the burning down of some commercial banks in Delta State, as we reported earlier, as well as the killing of 4 persons in Edo State in the aftermath of a protest around the CBN's premises in Benin City, which, by the way, has led to Governor Gordon Obaseki calling for an arrest of his predecessor, Adams Oshomole, over allegations that he instigated the protest that led to the death of 4 persons yesterday. While we cannot independently verify the identity of the 4 persons who have been killed, we leave that, of course, to security operatives to determine. Let's focus on the bigger impasse that we're having at the moment, the likely face-off between the executive arm of government and the judicial arm of government, which was informed by moves of 3 governors of Kaduna, Kogi, and Zamfara states, who issued a suit at the Supreme Court challenging the CBN's Naira redesign policy and the deadline for the validity of the use of the old note. Well, the governors had premised their arguments on the fact that the CBN did not afford Nigerians enough time to return the notes, hence the hardship it occasioned on Nigerians. And they implored the CBN to, of course, extend that deadline by a further 6 months. Well, Justice John Okoro, who headed the 7-man panel of justices at the Supreme Court, granted the prayers of the plaintiffs by ordering an ex parte injunction on the CBN and the federal government from continuing with the effect of the February 10 deadline, which was set aside as the date where the old notes will no longer become legal tenders. While the Supreme Court had adjourned for hearing to the 15th of February, that was yesterday, by the way, to eventually hear the motions filed by the respective parties, because as we know it, the federal government, through the Attorney General of the Federation, has equally filed an appeal at the Supreme Court challenging the originating summons initiated by the three governors. And just for our information, the number has increased from 3 to 9, the states who have joined the suit challenging the federal government and the CBN policy. And from the information available, it looks like most states are willing to join. Some have indicated interest, but yet to formally do so. So Nigerians were expecting some sort of bigger clarification on the part of the Supreme Court yesterday. But the big disappointment, some would say, is that the Supreme Court adjourned again the hearing till February 22nd. Make that 3 days before Nigerians head to the polls for the first of the two general elections. And it's back the question whether the Supreme Court has not aggravated the entire situation by adjourning the matter Nigerians expected them to give a ruling on as of yesterday. But the understanding we have is that the fact that most states are actually joining the suit, and of course both parties are being allowed to file up their respective defenses by the time the motion is formally heard on the 22nd, which is the date that the sitting has eventually been adjourned to. But one interesting thing or feature from yesterday's sitting was that the Supreme Court said there was no need for the plaintiffs to file for an extension of the ex parte injunction that was put in place by the Supreme Court on the 8th of February, saying that that ruling still exists. So, meaning, in the eyes of the Supreme Court, the old 200, 500, and 1,000 naira notes are still legal tenders and should be allowed to run concurrently with the newly redesigned note. That should have addressed the concerns most Nigerians had, except for the fact that we equally woke up to a new directive of the Central Bank of Nigeria on the 14th of February, a couple of days ago, instructing commercial banks across the country not to accept the new notes the old notes any further. And then they initiated some guidelines and procedures for Nigerians to return their cash back to the banks. But the process has been widely criticized. Some have said it's quite tedious. There are measures that are stringent as well, especially as it concerns how those in the rural areas will likely have access to fulfilling these modalities and then validating their respective accounts to be sure that their monies are actually safe. And the deadline that has been set aside for this exercise, 3 days. How feasible it is. It expires tomorrow, of course, being the 17th of February. And perhaps this informed the choice of most Nigerians to head to the streets to protest mildly. But quite unfortunately, the scenes from the NSAS protest in 2020 appear to be rearing their ugly heads again if development yesterday or the last 2 days are anything to go by. We've given you a vivid example of the scenarios we witnessed in Delta as well as Edo State. And most Nigerians are saying if care is not taken, the protest could likely spiral to other parts of the country, and it could degenerate to a state of chaos. Now, while no one is anticipating such level of damage on properties and installations across the country, let alone the loss of lives, as the reported news around the death of 4 persons in Edo State yesterday has been a rather disheartening news to most Nigerians, why they have had to suffer because of the policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria. So everyone seems to agree and are in tandem that the policy initiated by the CBN is a good one, because it further reiterates Mr. President's commitment that he will not allow anyone to mop up or mobilize resources to truncate the electoral process when the elections does come around on February 25 as well as March 11. As a matter of fact, it equally formed a part of Mr. President's nationwide broadcast earlier this morning, with some positing that perhaps that's why the president only allowed the old 200 naira notes to run for another 60 days. But same cannot be said for the 500 and 1,000 naira notes, because it's quite easy, some would say, to stash away millions or billions of naira with the 500 and 1,000 naira notes. But same cannot be said for the 200 naira notes. But how far will these measures and moves go to assuage the feelings of Nigerians and equally address the concerns and the fears that they have had, not just about their money, But having access to this money and ensuring the fluidity in the nation's economy, especially with business shutting down for the last few days and weeks, how do most of them get back on their feet after the travails that they've had to face in the last few days? And it's equally raised the question of whether or not we aren't heading for a constitutional crisis or a legal face-off between the executive arm of government and the judiciary. Because the understanding of everyone, including the layers of the layman, is that the Supreme Court is the highest court in the country. And so its decisions are binding on even the federal government. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, because it appears that things have changed courtesy of Mr. President's ruling. We get vivid understanding of all of these issues again when we come back from this break. We'll be joined by our guests to give us feelers all through these and the burgeoning concerns as to whether or not this policy will affect the All Progressives Congress chances ahead of the February 25 presidential and National Assembly polls. Stay with us. We'll be right back very shortly. Don't go anywhere.
Nigerian police, which is the only one allowed by grossly abuse. Our governors have to share police powers with the president as stipulated by the Constitution. We do not have a federal government police force. We have the Nigeria Police Force, which shall be administered, organized, and supervised by the Nigerian Police Force.
No, my lord, I want to say something. I want to say something here. Perhaps it might also enlarge the scope of people who should be invited here for examination. My lord, if we cannot find those who literally murdered Abiola, who are those people who could be said to be the beneficiaries of the death of Abiola?
Rogers has linked you with some of the killings he did.
He never did.
He linked you with the attempted murder of Hebrew.
He did not.
My lord, the Matters Council is leading the evidence in our matters.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my lord, but we can't be talking about cases which are in court.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my lord. These cases are in court, my lord. I'm just reminding your lordship.
My lord, sorry, my lord, I think I'll be in cross-examination.
Legally Speaking, a program that deals with legal issues and questions we face as citizens of this amazing country, Nigeria. Legally Speaking. Join us every Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. for Legally Speaking.
As Nigeria prepares for the general elections holding from 25th February 2023, broadcasters are enjoined to make ethical reportage their watchword. All political programs shall observe the provisions of the Nigeria Broadcasting Code and other extant laws relating to broadcasting. All broadcasting stations must adhere to the principles of pluralism and ensure equitable airtime to all political parties or views. All political programs shall adhere to the general principles of legality, decency, and truthfulness. For the avoidance of doubt, the broadcast of a political campaign, jingle, announcement, or any other form of partisan party identification or symbol ends not later than 24 hours before polling day. Hate speech is prohibited. Be professional. NBC, your right to quality broadcasting. Announcer.
My dear compatriots, I have found it necessary to address you today on the state of the nation and to render account on the efforts of our administration to sustain and strengthen our economy, enhance the fight against corruption, and sustain our gains in the fight against terrorism and insecurity, which has undoubtedly been impacted by several internal and external factors. Particularly, I'm addressing you as your democratically elected president to identify with you and express my sympathy over the difficulties being experienced as we continue the implementation of new monetary policies aimed at boosting our economy and tightening of the loopholes associated with money laundering. Let me reassure Nigerians that strengthening our economy, enhancing security, and blockage of leakages associated with illicit financial flows remain top priority of our administration. And I shall remain committed to my oath of protecting and advancing the interests of Nigerians and the nation at all times. In the last quarter of 2022, I authorized the Central Bank of Nigeria to redesign the 200 Naira, 500 Naira, and 1,000 Naira Nigerian banknotes. For a smooth transition, I similarly approved that the redesigned banknotes should circulate concurrently with the old banknotes till 31st January 2023, before the old note, in line with Section 20, subsection 3 of the CBN Act 2007, all existing old 1,000 Naira and 500 Naira notes remain redeemable at CBN and designated points. Considering the health of our economy and the legacy we must bequeath to the next administration and future generations of Nigerians, I admonish every citizen to strive harder to make their deposits by taking advantage of the platforms and windows being provided by the CBN. Let me assure Nigerians that our administration will continue to assess the implementation with a view to ensuring that Nigerians are not unnecessarily burdened. In this regard, the CBN shall ensure
Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Political Spectrum live on Spectrum Television. Don't forget, you can always head straight to all of our social media platforms for more feeds. Just search spectrumtv.ng. Well, let's get straight to the day's biggest story, and that's Mr. President's address, which has to an extent on the part of most Nigerians addressed the concerns that arose by the impasse created by the Naira redesign policy and the validity of the old 200, 500 and 1,000 Naira notes, and equally whether it would hamper the chances of the ruling All Progressives Congress APC at the February 25 Presidential and National Assembly polls, as well as the March 11 gubernatorial and state houses of assembly elections. Joining us live in our studios to talk us through these issues, we've been joined by Honorable Barrister Udeme. He is the APC candidate for the Ibionio and Itu Federal constituency ahead of the February 25 National Assembly polls. He joins us live in our studios this morning. Good morning to you, Barrister, and many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you as well. I wish you could say it's a pleasure for most Nigerians out there, but it's not been the case for most of us, if not everyone. In the last few days and weeks leading up to today's this morning's announcement by Mr. President, who has said allow the old 200 naira notes to remain in circulation, barring the 500 and the 1,000 naira old notes. Before we come into all of that, this policy has been widely criticized across board, with many saying this is another gimmick of the All Progressives Congress that hasn't augured well, for Nigerians. But the most interesting part of this argument is that a bulk of the criticisms that has trailed the Naira redesign policy have interestingly come from members of the All Progressives Congress. As a matter of fact, the suit challenging this policy at the Supreme Court on February 8th was instituted by three governors of Kogi, Kaduna, and Zamfara states, all on the platform of the APC. I'd first like to start by asking you what you made of this policy in the first place, and whether you think its long-term benefit outweighs the sufferings that Nigerians have gone through in the last few weeks, occasioned by the scarcity of the Naira notes.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. What's important is that this is a time in our country that everyone, is on the same page in terms of the effect of the government policy. I don't think from governors to the proletariats, the market women, I think everyone is affected. So we're all on the same page. Now you're talking about what could be the long-term effect. Yes, I'm not an economist, but I am very conscious of the fact that for you to engineer the economy, you need to have some monetary policies that may encourage production, and also that may curb inflation. But as a lawyer, I'm also aware that issues of money laundering has been a major problem in the polity. We've had occasions where they've been increasing banditry, they've been increasing all sorts of financial crimes. And it appears that the managers of the government monetary policy had thought that with the redesign of the Naira notes, that they will be able to manage some of these unfortunate situations in the economy. But currently, we've come to see that the effect of the policy has beaten too hard on the masses, for which reason you've seen a unanimity in the condemnation of the effect of the policy, not the policy itself. Like you mentioned, the governors of the APC, and of course the presidential candidate of the APC also came out to make it very clear that the effect, there must be a way of redressing and also ensuring that the long-term gains is not destroyed by the short-term suffering of the masses. And I want to start that by saying that I will want to commend the governors, the leaders who have felt that they must speak out, because it's actually not a very healthy thing for a society when you have people who are holding positions of authority, shying away, from taking sides with the masses, mainly because they are in leadership, they are in government. So I commend the governors who felt that they should stand on the side of the masses, irrespective of party affiliations. So it's quite commendable. Now, in terms of perhaps the president, we've heard his speech this morning, and I would have thought that because the matter is sub judice, because the matter is in court, that all the parties will await the outcome of the court verdict. But I was taken a bit aback when the president made a sort of direction. He gave a direction that is different from what the Supreme Court did. So I'm still very hopeful that in the coming days that perhaps the superior argument will prevail upon the presidency to see the need to bring out safety guards, regulations that will balance the effect of the long-term gain for which we appreciate and the suffering of the masses. Yeah, so that's my thinking.
Well, the superior argument you were talking about seems to now have a tentative date after the Supreme Court yesterday adjourned sitting again till February 22nd to continue with the hearing of the suits filed by the governors, who have now increased to 9, because we've had 6 other governors have equally joined the suit. The big question across the country right now is whether or not we're not heading for a constitutional crisis. While, of course, you sit here as an aspiring House of Representatives member, you equally have a good number of years in the bar as a solicitor of the Federal Republic. So you would sure understand the nitty-gritty nature of what these rulings mean. You have the highest court in the country ordering that the old 200, 500 and 1,000 naira notes can run side by side with the newly redesigned ones, pending when the Supreme Court would hear the matter. And that was the judgment we had on February 8th. Now, the date set aside for the hearing was just yesterday, February 15, and Nigerians were quite expectant that we would have further clarification on the part of the Supreme Court as to what to do next. But the confusion here is that you have the Supreme Court insisting that the judgment of February 8 still stands, so both notes can run side by side. And the executive arm of government came up this morning with the presidency's nationwide broadcast that only the 200 naira notes, the old ones that is, are still valid. What does the law say when you have two strong arm of governments disagree on a matter that appears to be constitutional?
It's on that basis that I made the statement that I will hope that in the coming days that superior reasoning will prevail. Because as far as we're concerned, the functions of the arms of government are cut out. It's the job of the court to interpret the law, the rules, the regulations, and of course the job of the executive to execute. So I would have expected as a lawyer that if the Supreme Court gives a ruling that all parties must maintain the standard, the status quo until a verdict is given on the matter. I certainly will not agree that anybody has the power to go against the verdict, the ruling, the guide of the Supreme Court, because like you've noted, we are in a constitutional democracy. The Constitution is very vital in our coexistence, in management of governance. So we must not give any impression that the highest court in the land has no role to play in this matter. And yesterday we monitored the event. I had my colleagues who were in the Supreme Court, and the court came out very clear. There was no ambiguity that we are on this matter. On 22nd we'll come back, but for now let all the parties maintain the status quo, which is let the legal tender continue to exist side by side, the new redesigned notes, and away from even the issue of the Constitution, the issue of where the law stands, because it's very clear. The law is that you must obey the verdict, the ruling, the guide of the court, so that we will not have an anarchy. Now, away from all of that, we come down to the grassroots. We come down to the market women. We come down to the masses who this policy is meant to even protect, and we begin to wonder if we don't have a means of exchange, if people are not able to pay their hospital bills, if people are not able to carry out transactions, then how will you want them to survive? We've also noticed the increase in restiveness in agitations. We've heard of banks, we've seen in the video, in the social media, of people going berserk because of the effect of this policy. So I will certainly toe the side of those who believe that for whatever it is worth, we must think of the people first. I agree with Mr. President that there is need for long-term management of the economy, but there is always need to be conscious of timing. The timing of, the stoppage of use of the old Naira notes appears to be too abrupt, too sudden. And we are aware, I went into a research and realized that issues of currency redesign or change is a usual thing, is what other climes have done. As we speak, in the UK, there is currently the policy of taking off old pound sterlings and coming up with new ones. But the effect has been managed in such a way that it doesn't bring untold hardship on the masses. So you allow the old ones to keep moving, because eventually all currencies are expected to get their way back to the bank. I actually am conscious of the fact that our culture, we may not be as developed as UK, but the idea about currency management is that all will eventually get to the bank. So as soon as they arrive at the bank, you don't release them again into the system. You rather release the new currency. But in Nigeria, it appears the new currency is very scarce. I personally run into a lot of difficulty trying to get access to the new currency in order to undertake transactions. And there are very few persons, the number of persons who are maybe into online banking, I don't think they are that much. So even making payment through the online system is proving difficult. Well, so all of this will, suggest that the government, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, will have to review his stance to avoid, a crisis. We must be very honest. That's why I will always applaud those who have come out to say, look, please let us help the masses. It shows that we have leaders who care for the people. And I'm not unaware also of the fact that the forthcoming elections, has a lot of influence on all of this. But the question will be, if there is any issue about a politician or politicians, should the masses die because you're trying to control, the politicians?
It now begs the question, after all the issues you have addressed. I'd like to ask, does the Constitution make any kind of provisions for Mr. President to have an overriding decision on any issue where the Supreme Court has already ruled? Because in the face of this, a lot of persons are tending to shy away from this particular side of the conversation. It looks like Mr. President has disrespected the Supreme Court ruling, because he has openly said the 500 and 1,000 Naira notes are no more legal tenders. Now that goes against the Supreme Court's ruling. As an aspiring legislator, where is the place of legislation in all of this? As a nation that runs with three major arms of government, this is an interface between the executive and the judiciary, and you have a National Assembly waiting on the wings and watching all of this development, but it looks like they've been quite silent in the last few weeks and days. So where does legislation have a role to play in all of this?
At this point, I think that the National Assembly will also need to weigh in. They will need to, of course, before now, we've had their position. They've been very clear that the CBN must be able to moderate the effect of this policy to ensure that it does not affect the masses. But the key question that you've asked is about the issue of disrespect, to the Supreme Court. And I must be very honest that there is no arm of government that is greater than the other. They are all expected to work in harmony to ensure that there is maintenance of law and order in the society. And to that extent, every institution is expected to obey the judgment of the Supreme Court, the verdict of the Supreme Court. So nobody has the power. Even the president we are running a constitutional democracy. We're guided by the rule of law. So no one man can come out and, by may, maybe statement override the verdict of the Supreme Court, that cannot be accepted anyway. So that goes back to what I started with, that superior argument must prevail. And what's the superior argument? That we must obey the Supreme Court, that the executive must be able to execute policies that will assist, the masses, that will reduce the suffering. We cannot act in isolation. If you go to chapter 2 of the Constitution, which is the basis of the governance of Nigeria, it tells, it's tailored to assist in ensuring that the common man is catered for, that there is security of lives and property, that people have access to, health, people are able to, have access to education. Now, with this policy, will we be able to achieve all of those lofty goals that are spelled out in the Constitution? We cannot, because you need a means of transaction in order to do this. So now that we are faced with this, my expectation is that the executive, the legislature, they must come together to achieve a middle ground while ensuring that we have the long-term benefit of curbing insecurity, of discouraging money laundering, of being able to rejig the economy. We must not lose sight of the fact that the poor masses are suffering. We must be able to set a date. Perhaps the least of what I think should be that the date should be extended, because I have staff who work with me, and I imagine how they will easily have the notes exchanged at the central bank. Yesterday, the driver, for example, who works with me, was trying to exchange the old notes, and he could not until it was late in the night. And the procedure of having to take this note to the central bank is quite cumbersome. So I think we should continue to exploit the avenue of using the commercial banks to mop up these notes, and not allow everything to be taken to the central bank. You have only one central bank point, for instance, in Akwa Ibom State, but you have several commercial banks. So it's easier for the money to go back into the system through the commercial banks than through one single entity.
But the originating concerns as to why the CBN perhaps opted for Nigerians returning their monies to the central bank, some would say may have been occasioned by the fact that doing it through the commercial banks hasn't worked. I mean, we had up until January 31st, which was extended to February 10, from October last year, for Nigerians to do so. But that process appeared to have been truncated with reports that the banks were working in connivance with some big customers, so to say, to stash away this money or only serve the purposes of the bigger customers at the expense of millions of others of Nigerians. So if that purpose has been defeated, do you think there was anything wrong with the CBN opting for the second option? And since we've factored in the CBN into this argument, there's been a lot of debate about the position of the CBN on this matter with regards to their autonomy and independency granted by the act that established the CBN. And perhaps that informed the choice of the governors who filed that suit, not to mention the CBN as a party, when they took that case to the Supreme Court. Do you think that informs the decision of the CBN to continue acting in this regard? It looks like no one is reining in Mr. Godwin Emefiele, the CBN governor, because there's an act guiding and, allowing the CBN to operate as an autonomous body.
What you need to know, the public must know, is that in the acts that you refer to, provisions are made for issues of currency, and the CBN governor cannot on his own take a decision on issue of for instance, the redesign or the change of naira. He must necessarily have the such directive from the Mr. President. It must be approved. What does that tell you? He's an agent of Mr. President. And you see, in law, an agent of a disclosed principal need not be brought to court. As far as the issue of redesign of Naira note is possible, Emefiele cannot, that's the governor of Central Bank, cannot work on his own. He needs to have the directive of Mr. President. There must be approval. So you can't, worry about going to bring Mr. Emefiele as a defendant in a suit when you know that his principal in respect of this particular act is Mr. President. And where there is any conflict between the government of a state and the federal government, Supreme Court has the original jurisdiction. As far as I'm concerned, that suit was properly filed. Perhaps let's see what the view of the court will be. But as a practicing lawyer, if I'm briefed to take up the matter, I will, on the basis of the agency rule, sue Mr. President. I will not name Mr. Emefiele. And you see, we must be careful not to extrapolate the issue of independence, as if Mr. Emefiele or the CBN is outside the entity called Nigeria. The independence is to the effect that the CBN must be able to execute its functions without interference. They must be able to, set up policies that can regulate the banks and not have anybody break down or any institution break down their back. But that is where it stops. Insofar as it has to do with the survival of our country, CBN cannot be that independent.
You have said
they have to be answerable.
You've said
to
the
the National
suit was
Assembly.
properly filed, in your own words. The suit was properly filed. You don't have concerns about the fact that it bypassed the trial court and went right up until the Supreme Court. Some solicitors, as you, have said the Supreme Court did not have the jurisdiction to entertain the case at that level.
No, I respect the opinion of my colleagues who may say so. And I will expect also that they respect my opinion to the effect that the CBN, in respect of this particular subject matter, is an agent of a disclosed principal. And the action is taken against the principal, who is Mr. President. So at that point, I don't think that it's necessary to join this. If you join the CBN, you need to go to the Federal High Court. And at that level, I don't think the state is a dispute between the state and the federal government. But if you're looking at the fact that the directive for the redesign of the Naira must come from the approval of Mr. President, then you will see that there is a clear subject matter that is between the state and the federal government. So I, with due respect, believe that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction by virtue of the law, which states that where there is a dispute between the state and the federal government, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. So that's my view about the issue of the case. But the point I was making was about the touted independence of the CBN. And my position is that the CBN is independent to the extent of its functions, to the extent of managing and regulating the financial institutions in the country. But they can never be independent in respect of issues that affect the corporate entity of Nigeria. They cannot, in executing their functions, put the entity in, set the country ablaze. At that point, they will be subject to the National Assembly that has the power to also investigate its activities. They will also be subject to the directive of Mr. President, who indeed has the power to appoint. Note, in appointment of the CBN governor, that has to come through the Mr. President and also the legislature. So that in itself shows that the CBN cannot act in isolation. So we must not take the independence to the to a point that they will now come and foist a suffering on Nigerians, and by the time they are asked why they're doing that, somebody will say, oh, CBN is independent. No, the independent does not get to that ridiculous level.
So now, all of this is happening around a very critical period. The elections are just around the corner. And quite interestingly, the Supreme Court adjourned its case to February 22nd, make that 3 days before the presidential and National Assembly poll. So it leads us now to the politicking. Most Nigerians, including members of the All Progressives Congress, have said this policy is largely targeted at truncating the party's chances at the polls. We've even seen the presidential candidate of your party, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, come out in the heydays of this policy to claim that it was actually targeted at him. The decision of the three governors to go to the Supreme Court, led by Governor Nasser El-Rufai of Kaduna, also claimed Mr. Emefiele was working with so-called fifth columnists to equally truncate the chances of the APC at the polls. So you would have thought that Mr. President would receive widespread support from members of his own party. Well, as much as you've said, it's good for people to come out and defend the masses in situations where it appears that they are going through or feeling the brunt of most of these policies. But why do you think there's a general division within the All Progressives Congress around this policy? And why do some people feel it is actually targeted at them? If you have no skeletons in your cupboards to hide.
No, what we need to get very clear is that Mr. President runs governance, is the head of the federal government, and we must not model that up with the party. There is a difference, whether you like it or not, between the government and the party in power. They may have that, let me say, relationship because the party, brought the government in power. That's okay. But in terms of the duties, in terms of the policies, the government has an overriding, responsibility, to manage, the issues of governance. Now, for issues of the party, you have the leadership of the party, let me say, those who run the day-to-day activities of the party. Now, those are the ones who feel that this policy perhaps may not be okay with the masses, and they've spoken out. And I think that also shows that the APC, is that party that has the interest of the people at heart. Because if they don't come out to speak for the masses, who will speak for them? And they have called the attention of the managers of governance that, please, our party is a people-oriented party. Our party is a progressive party. This policy need not be taken to a level that will affect them. And for those of us who are even, running the elections, we see it clearly that it's not something that our party does as a policy. It is government. And of course, take note, in our country, we cannot run away from the fact that our institutions are being built. We're trying daily to ensure that we don't have the strongman mentality, which seems often to outshine or overpower the credibility of institutions. So this again has proven the fact that the party needs to grow to a level where it can, have more than a casual influence on the government. Because as we speak, Mr. President, we must be honest, he's built a good reputation for himself over the time. He's done his best. And for those of us in the party, we believe he has good intentions. But perhaps the implementers, those who are supposed to execute this intention of his, haven't been able to do it in a way that will assist the masses.
I like to think you're referring to the CBN in this case.
Yeah, they are the ones who manage the government policy. Who would have expected that they have enough of the new Naira notes, the redesigned currency? One would have expected that they have put in, the strategy on ground to ensure that they're pushing these, currencies into the field before they, activate the deadline of taking off the old Naira notes. Because, for example, I was in the bank to make a withdrawal, and I was told I could only get 5,000 Naira. Even when the policy was muted, the idea was that you could at least have 20,000 Naira over the counter. So why suddenly, in practice, when you go to the bank, you are being told that you can only get 5,000? That tells you there is a lacuna in the strategy of ensuring that the new Naira note, gets in. Either that there is short supply or enough hasn't been printed. There is certainly something that is not really going down well.
Or maybe there are some persons hoarding the cash.
That may also be another leg of the argument. But for me, I feel that there is need for those who want to execute this policy to have the homekeeping, to make their strategy right before you don't just get up one day and begin to say, okay, I want to change the entire studio and maybe bring in new equipment. No, you do it gradually. You don't need to throw away the baby and the bathwater. You must look at what is wrong with this other policy. Then you take the ones that may be right. Just something you do it systematically, not abruptly, not suddenly. What has happened in our polity today is because the issue of stoppage, sudden stoppage of the use of the old Naira notes is what has brought the hardship, because a lot of persons had felt that it will be a gradual process. And if you compare in other climes, like I've noted, it's usually, it goes pari passu. This one goes in, the other one comes out. Not something you totally ban one and you are not able to bring the other to replace.
Not holding fault for the federal government here or the CBN, but the overall design of this policy, apart from the fact that Mr. President, in his own words, said he was trying to prevent people from mopping up resources to truncate the election, the bigger target here is trying to arrive at a cashless policy. And this is a message that has been wrong for several years leading up to the implementation or the design and the implementation of this policy. So would you say that since October last year, when the information first came out that the Naira would be redesigned with the notes in question, that was not sufficient enough for Nigerians to begin to try to actualize the cashless policy state by doing or fulfilling whatever requirement it would take to have seamless, transaction of business and services between October and this year? Are you saying that's not sufficient enough?
I'm sorry, it's very laughable when a third world country, let's be very frank about our situation, it's laughable when people want to import an idea that people have grown for decades, and they suddenly dream that they can use 90 days to effect a cashless system in a country where you have majority, about 70% rural community, in a country where you do not have banks that that are operating in the suburbs, in the villages. It breaks the heart. It becomes very painfully laughable that we will just imagine that by May announcement that October, we want to go cashless, without the infrastructure in place. You have many of our fishermen, many of our farmers who are doing businesses in the interior parts of this country, and you've not set up a system that will assist them to access banking services, even in areas that you may consider urban, like in where you have your studio now. It will take you maybe up to 30 minutes or so, several kilometers, before you can access a bank. So even in where you are, aside that there is the electronic, or let me say the what do you call it, the signals that people may be able to access us and are part of this program, that's where it stops. When they finish hearing the announcement that we are going cashless, the next thing they will want to see is a bank. You don't have a bank around here. So I would have expected that the designers of this policy should be conscious that in where we are, in a developing world as this, in a world where illiteracy is still very high, that we will take it gradually. I recall that when the policy initially was conceived, I remember issues of Abuja, Port Harcourt. There were some states that were earmarked as pilot states for the test run of the cashless policy. That would have been also a good idea. That in terms of saying, okay, let's take off the Naira notes, we would have said, all right, let's see how many banks, let's see how many financial institutions we can, create so that the rural community, will have access before we go into the ban. So it falls flat in the face of reasoning for us to hold the argument that because there was an announcement about 90 days ago, sometime maybe in October, that by January that we ought to have all gone cashless, forgetting that it takes a lot of education, it takes a lot of infrastructure for us to achieve that. For God's sake, let's appeal to policymakers. We've heard this morning that the 200 notes will continue to be in circulation. It may not be enough. It's still hardship. So I use this medium to call on the executive, call on the legislatures to have a way of allowing superior argument to prevail, which is that they must extend the time for the old notes to exist side by side. It should exist side by side, and over time they will be able to mop out the old notes and allow the new notes. And there must be a massive and intentional effort to deploy, print, and push the new notes into the system. Otherwise, it won't augur well for the masses.
So let's still dwell on the politicking while wrapping up. Now, I did ask about the possibilities of these policies affecting the chances of your party at the polls. The elections are just around the corner, barely 8 days to go. Do you feel it's something that would play on the minds of Nigerians, especially if someone like you is an aspiring candidate for the House of Representatives on the platform of the All Progressives Congress? So do you think it would play on the minds of Nigerians that we are suffering the adverse effect of the policy initiated by an APC-led administration? Is it something that could equally affect your chances?
We must be very frank. We must be very frank with ourselves. Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari has felt this policy will be good, and the implementation we've all seen is not. And the first set of persons to say, look, Mr. President, let's go on the side of the masses, is the APC. The party that has the interest of the people at heart is the APC. I've not had anybody from any party come out to beg, to canvass for the protection and the amelioration of the sufferings of our people. So APC remains that party that is quite empathic. It has a lot of empathy for the people. But again, I must state it very clearly. The voters are smarter. The voters now know that you must vote those persons who have the antecedent to assist the country. We know the antecedents of His Excellency President Buhari. I was far younger when he was the president I was an infant in 1984. So I know that those who voted him, of course, they know his antecedent. We also know the antecedent of Asiwaju Tinubu. Those antecedents will speak for them. It's not a toga, it's not any appellation of party A, party B. As far as Nigerians are concerned, we know very well that it's not about the name of the party. It's about the capacity, the competence of those who are going to run on that party. If you even talk about party, who is more APC than His Excellency Atiku Abubakar? That is the man who ran as the candidate of the AC. That's the man who was a chieftain of the APC. That was the person who brought His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari. He was part of them. So you will not come and say that people will vote merely because of there's a name about the party. In fact, the bigger issue in this election remains that power should also come to the South. That is the biggest issue that I will hope that the public will get to know, that it's been an understanding that at every point in time in Nigeria, we must not have any section appear to be oppressive on the other section. For balance, if power leaves the North, which is Excellency Buhari is completing his 8-year tenure, there should be a balance that the South should also produce a president to show mutual respect, to show unity. That's the bigger issue in this election. It's not about the name of a party per se. We need this country to be united. We need to immediately forget how, through the military, a section of the country appear to have used the military to oppress us. We need to immediately have a sense of belonging, that those of us who are from the South are also, we have a stake in this, entity called Nigeria. For me, I've made my point very clear. I'm running elections based upon the fact that, by the special grace of God, I've been properly trained as a lawyer, as a politician. I've had the opportunity to serve as a local government chairman. I've had the opportunity to serve in the executive arm of government as a senior special assistant on electoral matters to the governor. I've had the experience of serving in the party at the grassroots as an executive member of the PDP before I resigned to join the APC. So I'm going into this election with my antecedent, my track record, my competence, and my capacity. I'm not going into this election merely on the name Party A or Party B. My name is Udeme, and my antecedents are there. But you see, the law has said you must have a political platform, because when you get the ballot, you will not see any human face there.
Okay.
And we are hoping that going forward, we will get to a point where our democracy will develop to a point that you can have an independent candidate, where I can run my election on my own. So let's not allow party to stop the competence of candidates from running the elections.
Okay, interesting thoughts, but we're going to have to leave it there, and hopefully when next we call on you, it will oblige us an opportunity to talk even further, especially as it equally concerns your aspirations going forward. But many thanks indeed, Barrister Udeme, for joining us on Political Spectrum today.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
All right, that was Barrister Udeme, is the APC House of Reps candidate for the Ibiono-Itu Federal constituency ahead of the elections, which would of course kickstart with the February 25 presidential and National Assembly polls. But the burgeoning concerns for Nigerians surrounds the validity of the old note, and Mr. Presidency's nationwide broadcast this morning ordering the central bank to circulate the old 200 naira notes to run concurrently with the new ones, while the 500 and 1,000 naira old notes have all ceased to become legal tenders. How far will this drama continue? When next we come your way on another edition of Political Spectrum, we'll do well to keep you abreast with this information. But thanks for joining us. Coming up next is Business 360 from me, Raymond Eaton, and the rest of the crew. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.